Veteran on the Move, episode number 4. Welcome to Veteran on the Move, your pathfinder to freedom. If you're a transitioning veteran, an entrepreneur wannabe, or someone who's still stuck in that job trying to escape, this podcast is dedicated to your success. So welcome aboard. Sit back and enjoy the ride. All right, thanks for joining us. We're talking with Col Bob Ulin, U.S. Army, retired today. Bob, thanks for joining us today. I'd like to spend a minute or so talking about what you did in your Army career.
Okay, thanks, Joe, and I appreciate the opportunity to engage with you on this. I joined the Army right out of high school as an enlisted soldier and went to Germany. And while I was in Germany, and this is back in 1960, the Berlin Wall went up. Fast forward 30 years later, when I left the Army, I was at NATO headquarters as a colonel when the Berlin Wall came down. So I guess I'm the quintessential Cold War soldier. And during that time, I'd spent, when I went to officer candidate school, I ended up going to Vietnam, first tour in the Central Highlands as an artillery battery commander. My firing battery, 8-inch 175, fired 65,000 rounds of ammunition.
Holy cow.
Yeah,
65,000?
65,000.
In what time frame?
Well, over a period of about a year.
Wow.
But the guns were blasting 24/7. I had 2 8-inch and 2 175, and we ran missions up on the tri-border area with Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. In fact, my battery was the first artillery battery engaged by Soviet artillery in a counter-battery fight up on the tri-border area. We were engaged by 100-millimeter Soviet field pieces being manned by the North Vietnamese. And the prime movers, by the way, were elephants. And so we got a good write-up on that story. They blew a bunch of holes inside the battery area, but they didn't hurt anybody. But anyhow, so then after I left Vietnam, because I had had a break in service where I worked in the ballistic missile industry in California, I ended up in Pershing Missiles and spent time with them in Germany, nuclear-tipped Pershing missiles, and driving them around the woods. And back then, mobile missile launchers were almost impossible to target. I found out later that while I was at NATO headquarters in a subsequent assignment, I was in the process of negotiating their demise with the Soviets. Then the United States and NATO was negotiating with the Soviets and the Warsaw Pact, and we trimmed the Pershing and the SS-20s on the Soviet sides and the ground-launched cruise missiles and so on. So Pershing Missile Tour ended up a foreign area officer, served in embassies and international headquarters, and we ended up retiring on the faculty of the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania in 1992. 22 years ago, I retired.
Time goes quick, huh?
Boy, I'll say. And the older you get, the faster it seems to go.
Well, it's an amazing career, and thank you for your service, and thank you for sharing that with you. Mm-hmm. And a while back, I was talking with you, and you're telling me 1992 post Desert Storm,
right?
And the military drawdown was going strong. And I believe you were in Germany or had orders to Germany when the axe came down for you.
Yeah, what happened is on the War College, and because I was enlisted for 6.5 years, I had 33 years of service at the time in 1992, and I got a call one day from the personnel managers, and they said, "Hey, how would you like to go become a defense attaché in Europe?" And so they gave me a number of countries to choose from, and I chose Germany, and ended up going to the embassy and meeting the ambassador, who I knew, by the way. He had been a student of mine at the Army War College. He was a reserve colonel. His name is Bob Kimmett, West Point graduate. And Bob was looking forward to me coming over, and I was looking forward to serving him. And so I got this black book nomination assignment to the embassy, and 3 months later, I was picked up on the Selective Early Retirement Board because the Army was downsizing after the Cold War, not dissimilar about what's happening today. And so I found myself being retired as opposed to going to Germany as a defense attaché. I was.
So did you have orders in hand heading to Germany?
No, they were about to cut the orders.
Uh-huh.
It's called a black book assignment. It has to go through the Pentagon, and everybody has to sign off on whether or not you can become a defense attaché in an embassy abroad. And so we went through the nominative process, updated my top secret security clearance and all that stuff. And so I was on a fast track to do that. And before the orders were actually cut, a separate board had met, and I got selected for early retirement along with 17 other colonels at the Army War College that year.
Wow.
We were notified on St. Patrick's Day, and so we remember that day as the St. Patrick's Day Massacre.
So here you are about to head off to Germany on a really good deal, and then you get the phone call, not so fast. So,
that's right.
So how quickly did you have to retire? How much time do you have before you're out?
Well, we were notified in March, St. Patrick's Day, and I was out on the 1st of October, I believe it was.
Uh-huh.
And the challenge I had, Joe, was that I hadn't spent a lot of time in the United States. In my career, I spent 2.5 years in Vietnam during the war. Mm-hmm. And then I spent 17 years in Europe as a foreign area officer.
Wow.
With tactical units, and then at SHAPE headquarters in United States, or the embassy in Brussels, and then NATO headquarters. And so I didn't really have any business connections. My network was all European. Right. And so I ended up, when I retired, I couldn't find a job. In fact, I didn't have a job for 2 years. And that led me to do what I do now, and kind of helping guys, build their networks and think about transition to the private sector, because it's not as easy as one might think. And some of the listeners, I'm sure, will appreciate that. And it's a skill like anything that we've ever done. My view is you got to create a campaign plan, and you need to think deliberately about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and start building a solid network. Because the key is you're going to find a job with somebody that you already know. That person will either offer you a job or tee up a job for you.
Now, can you go into some detail what happened during that 2 years and when the light bulb came on for you, and you're like, okay, this is what I need to do as far as networking and everything?
Sure. Well, I did interview for a bunch of jobs. I got one kind of funny story, I guess. I interviewed for the Dauphin County, this is in Pennsylvania, Dauphin County Red Cross director. And I thought, well, that'd be a nice thing to do. And so I went down, and I'm being interviewed by a gal that's about 26 years old. And she had me sitting at a brace on the other side of the table, very uncomfortable. And the interview went well, I think. And again, she was my daughter's age. And it was a bit of a humbling experience. And so I got a reject letter, and she said in the reject letter, "Dear Corporal Ulin." She didn't know the difference between a colonel and a corporal. And it was a real aha moment for me.
And you'd probably been both, right? You'd been a corporal and a colonel. So
yeah. But still, I think it really speaks to it really speaks to the point that the people in the private sector don't really appreciate or understand the military very well. Of course, they're the yellow ribbons and all of that sort of thing about fighting in war, and we get that thank you for your service thing, but they really do not understand us and our culture. And I will say that we really don't understand them and their culture. Mm-hmm. And that's a real challenge for us. So anyhow, I had a number of interviews, and I ended up I did some direct marketing. There was a company called Quorum that sold security products and door-to-door sort of thing. And I read a lot of head books like Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, and the Tony Robbins books were all a rage back then. Uh-huh. So I read a bunch of that. And the bottom line, I was trying to reprogram myself into thinking about how to make money as opposed to in the military, how we just spend other people's money.
Definitely a mindset change.
Oh, absolutely. And because, no, private sector is not a welfare organization. People are not going to hire you no matter how much they thank you for your service. They're not going to hire you to come in and unless you can add value to their organization and increase their bottom line. At the end of the day, they've got to make money.
Absolutely, and without it's called the bottom line. And if the bottom line's not working, then they're going
That's
to have to
right.
make changes. So what happened around the 2-year mark for you?
Well, I was, failing successfully in business, but learning an awful lot. I had entertained the idea of going back to school and getting another advanced degree. I already had 2 masters. And then one day on a Saturday, I get a call from a friend of mine who was a retired major general. He's a former commandant of the War College. And he said, "Hey," he said, "I'm over here on an exercise and we need a political military analyst to do some work. Are you interested?" And I said, "Well, where are you?" And he said, "Grafenwehr, Germany." And I said, "Well, does this pay?" And he said, "Yeah, $500 a day." I said, "I'm on my way." Uh, and the rest is history, because once I got in that job as a military analyst, and I was doing kind of major level work, I guess, that wasn't terribly humbling to me because I hadn't worked for 2 years on a steady basis. I was just going in and poking the keyboard and doing my analysis and research. And then one of the guys in the company that was the program manager, another retired colonel, he asked me if I'd be willing to set up a research center in Heidelberg, Germany. And I jumped at the chance, and I got hired full time. And then for the next 12 years, I worked in various defense industries, various companies, and moved from analyst to site manager, project manager, program manager. And then I got hired by a civilian company as their vice president for government services. So in the 12 years that from the time I got the call and went to Germany on this job, 12 years later, I worked for 5 different companies and never missed a day of work, and then just steadily moved up the chain.
And then at the end of that 12 years after retiring, you had a shift or a pretty significant direction change, didn't you?
Yes. Yeah, I had worked both with government contractors and private companies. Learned a great deal, and decided that I wanted to go back to the college and teach, Command General Staff College. I live in Leavenworth, Kansas, and the college is, pretty close to here, about 4 miles from my house, actually. So I thought it'd be good to get back into the classroom and spend some time with my military colleagues. So I did that. I retired from the private sector and started teaching. And because I had a business background, I was invited to join a working group on how to establish a foundation, a private foundation to support the college. And over a period of a year, we collected a lot of data, and I found myself the chairman of this group because none of the others in the group had private sector experience. And the bottom line was that we did form the Command and General Staff College Foundation. I left my Title X position on the faculty and became the first chief executive officer of the Command and General Staff College Foundation.
So after a long military career and 12 years in the civilian world, you found yourself standing up a foundation, essentially a nonprofit. And then, and how long did you actually, you were the head of the foundation and operated it for how long?
Well, I was one of 3 founders. It takes 3 people to organize a foundation in the state of Kansas. So, but I was the lead for that. And then I was appointed chief executive officer. And I was the CEO for the first, for 7 years and 4 months. We raised about $12 million. I think a couple of the big highlights is I got a $6.1 million gift from Ross Perot. It took me 3 years to close that deal. And
lots of networking involved in that one, huh?
oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I would fly to Washington D.C. To just attend a dinner that he was going to be at. Fly to Washington D.C., spend the night, go to the dinner or the event, that I could just be in the room with him and shake hands with him and get to know him and to build a relationship. Because people give money to people that they know and trust. So you might be the richest guy in the world, but that doesn't mean you're just going to give your money away to anybody.
Right.
And so you got to build a relationship. So that took about 3 years. And then we got a congressional grant to develop a Homeland Security Master's Degree program. And then the biggest program I did was the 5-star General Commemorative Coin Program that I got through the 111th Congress. And I ended up with 300 co-sponsors in the House and 74 senators in the Senate. And it takes 2/3 of each house. And that took me 2.5 years. Every 6 weeks for 2.5 years, I was in Washington, D.C. for 2 or 3 days, walking the floors, and I've been in every single member of Congress's office, trying to convince them that they needed to sign up on this bill.
That's amazing. And so you ended up getting approval for the coins.
Mm-hmm.
And do you remember what the numbers were as far as sales on those things went? Because I think they sold really fast.
Yeah, they only sold in the year, I think it was 2013. And the legislation itself restricted the number of coins that could be sold. And there's a surcharge attached to it. I mean, that's the reason I did it. There's a surcharge that goes to the sponsoring organization.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom line is, I don't know what the final numbers were, but it was about close to $2.5 million that the foundation earned as a result of the surcharges on these coins. And we were responsible for promoting them too. What I found out is the United States Mint does not operate on appropriations. In other words, when they sell their coins, they make enough money to pay for their business operation. And so we were helping them sell the coins. And then the surcharge, for every gold coin that we sold, it was $35 surcharge. For every silver dollar that was sold, we got $10. And for every clad $50 coin, we got $5. And the bottom line is, it was almost $2.5 million of money that came to the foundation in what they call unrestricted funds. I mean, things that we could use to provide support to the college, pay for our overhead and business operations, and do the things that we do to help promote and advance the cause of the Command General Staff College.
That's amazing. And in case anybody missed it, the coin you're talking about, the main coin you're talking about, was the 5-star General coin.
Yeah, there were 3 coins in a set. There was a gold coin that had General of the Army Douglas MacArthur. There was a silver coin, a large silver coin that had Generals of the Army Marshall and Eisenhower. And then there was the $50 clad coin, a little bit smaller than the silver, and it had General of the Army Omar Bradley and General of the Air Force Hap Arnold. And those 3 coins in a set, they sold as sets and they sold as individual coins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I've always wondered how the commemorative coin thing worked. It's definitely put a lot of networking and time into that. So, which ultimately was just from the surcharge, $2.5 million for the foundation. That's amazing. Mm-hmm. So not too long ago, you decided to retire from the foundation.
Right.
Went back out into the civilian sector, if you will, and you started up your Ulin Consulting Group. Mm-hmm. And also the Center for Transitional Leadership.
Correct. Right.
And tell us about, what's the consulting group and how it led to the Center for Transitional Leadership.
Okay. Yeah, I started up a little, what we call an LLC, Limited Liability Corporation, It's a little for-profit organization. It's a consultancy that I operate out of my house. It's focused on supporting nonprofits. One of the things that I learned in the 7.5 years of running the CGSC Foundation is that raising money is hard. And there is a process, but you've got to be very deliberate, and you have to be almost dogged in your determination to get things done. Nobody likes to raise money. They like to spend money, but nobody likes to raise money. And you really don't have a product to sell. You end up getting money because you have a story to tell. And if you've got a powerful, compelling story, you can raise money. Well, I teach fundraising classes, and in fact, I've got a proposal going to a client now that's a new CEO, and to go in and help educate his board on their duties and responsibilities, their fiduciary and legal responsibilities, to help educate the CEO and how to, set up his fundraising mechanisms, what his responsibilities are under the law, and generally help him get organized for success. So I sell my services in doing that. Now, another thing I do, I started a new nonprofit called the Center for Transitional Leadership that you mentioned. And this is where I'm helping guys that are going through the downsizing that the military is experiencing today to find work in the private sector. Now, all of our post camps and stations have transition assistance programs, but the one thing that they don't do very well is they're not terribly well networked to the civilian community and to the hiring managers. And so what I do is I'm encouraging people to go through your transition assistance programs and get that done. But if you know people on the outside, and what I work with primarily are majors, lieutenant colonels, and colonels, E7s, 8s, and 9s. And I have a network of 70 retired military officers who are in businesses in the greater Kansas City area, for instance. And so I tee up informational interviews, help them evaluate their resumes, help them with their interview skills. In fact, I'm teaching a 90-minute class in a couple of weeks on salary and benefit negotiation, something we've never had to do in the military.
Right.
But if you don't know how to handle yourself well in that, you can leave an awful lot of money on the table in a negotiation. And oh, by the way, people who are hiring you, they expect you to negotiate. And so the first offer is not the final offer. But it's a lot of those things that I know about because I've been not in the military and in the private sector, that I can help people kind of work through their transition. I don't promise them a job. They'll find their own job.
Sure.
But I can help them manage the process.
Now, for veterans in transition out there, if they wanted to look at the Center for Transitional Leadership and utilize your services, is there a cost to them, or what's the commitment from them?
Right now, there's no cost. I'm self-financing this out of pocket because I don't have my tax exempt status yet. I filed with the IRS, and as you know, the IRS is not exactly they're not exactly responsive to nonprofits these days.
Yeah,
that's another discussion. We don't have to go into that now,
right.
But at any rate, I'm waiting for my tax exempt status. It usually takes anywhere from 6 months to 1.5 years to get that. And with that, I can start raising money because the people who give you money, then they can deduct it from their income tax.
Sure.
So I haven't really gone out and done that. I don't even have a website yet because to build a portal, and what I want to do is I want to build a portal that's got all of the companies that I know can advertise their positions. All of the people that I know can post their information and start creating the connections. I've got a lot of support material on how to interview and what informational interviews are about, how to negotiate for salaries and how to dress for success and the whole thing. And I'm doing things that the transition assistance programs just simply cannot do.
Well, if there's any veterans in transition out there that would, even though you don't have your tax exempt status at this point, you're already working and in business, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
so how would, if any veterans want to take advantage of your services, how would they get a hold of you?
Well, I would say the best way would be to send me an email.
Okay.
And that is Bob, B-O-B dot Ulin, U-L-I-N, at CTL, that's Center for Transitional Leadership, dash INC, stands for incorporated, dot O-R-G.
Okay. And what else could a veteran in transition who wants to utilize your services expect? Where do you begin?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm only really focused on the greater Kansas City area right now. So I don't have a lot of contacts out of greater Kansas City. Using what we call the Army training model is crawl, walk, run.
Right.
And we're in the crawl stage right now. So I don't want to bite off more than I can chew, but I'm sort of focused on here in the Midwest with Fort Leavenworth, Fort Riley, Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. Haven't really reached down into Fort Leonard Wood yet, or McConnell Air Force Base down in Wichita, Kansas. But I'm trying to kind of keep it in the home front and focused on the greater Kansas City community right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I help them with is we have seminars and training, opportunities for entrepreneurs. I mean, starting a nonprofit or starting your own business is always an option. Classes on networking and how to do effective networking, social media orientation, interviewing skills, how to negotiate medical benefits. Boy, there's a big one.
Oh, yeah.
Because, most companies, they have medical benefits packages. Well, if you don't have to accept their package because you have TRICARE, you can negotiate the difference in what you're saving the company to add into salary.
Yeah, and that's not peanuts either. That's
No.
Quite a big expense.
Well, I will tell you, when I was a vice president of a company, the company I work for, it cost us $8,500 a year per employee that we paid to the healthcare company for our program. So if you didn't need the benefit, I just saved $8,500. Well, if you know that, you ought to get at least half of that back in salary.
Yeah, and I'm sure what year are you talking about? I'm sure it's a whole lot more than that.
Oh gosh,
now.
that was 12 years ago. So
yeah, it's probably at least twice that much.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, and once again, I don't promise anybody a job, but then they're not paying for the services either. And what I do is I tee up the network that I have of about 60 or 70 guys in Kansas City. They agree to host informational interviews, and that's where you just go in and you chat with somebody and learn about the private sector. I think it's really important to do an informational interview with a business person before you're actually sitting down in front of somebody, negotiate or interviewing for a job.
Yeah, no different than practicing your brief before you present it to everybody.
That's exactly right. And so to get some hands-on experience, you need to do that. I will tell your listeners that you got to be comfortable in sales. People hate that, saying I'm not in sales. Well, when you're hunting for a job, you're definitely in sales, and you are the product.
Yep.
And so you got to know yourself, and you got to know how to sell your product, because you're selling yourself. People want to hire people that they can build a relationship with and that will be a good cultural fit inside of their company. I always said that if you've got the knowledge, skills, and ability that would work inside of my company, and you're a good cultural fit for me, I will teach you the hard skills that you need once you get in. But what I don't want to do is have a disruptive individual in my company, because it's going to suck the energy out of the company.
And I think that's something a lot of military guys might overlook, is you don't look for the job that you think has the salary you need But more importantly, you really need to work for the company where you're going to fit in and you're going to like the people around you and they're going to like you. You get that part correct out of the gate, and worry about the salary and the benefits and stuff like that later.
Well, not only that, but there was an interesting article the other day that I read that, the military is being paid extremely well right now, and they're being paid better than the private sector.
Yes.
And so a lot of individuals that get out and say, I'm worth $100,000. Just use that figure. Well, guess what? You're only worth what somebody's willing to pay you. and your first job is to get in the door. And once you get in the door, you can demonstrate that you have the knowledge, skills, and ability. And the one thing I say that we always have that is so powerful that a lot of private sector people don't have, we have leadership, organization, and planning skills in spades. And once you get in the door and you start demonstrating your value, you will rise up in the company quickly. And another thing you got to realize is that this concept that we've devoted our life to selfless service in the military in exchange for, steady employment. There's no such thing as steady employment in the private sector. I mean, you could be here today and gone tomorrow. I mean, if they lose a big contract, they lay people off.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. There's several common themes coming out with talking with veterans that have transitioned into the business world. And one of the things I heard it put a while back was military guys are used to risking their lives, but they're not used to risking their money.
That's correct.
And the civilian world's used to risking their money all the time, but they're not used to risking their lives.
That's correct.
It's really a total 180 out from what a veteran's used to doing. He's got that steady paycheck coming in every 2 weeks. He's not necessarily comfortable risking his life, but he knows that goes with the job. You get out in the civilian world, it's flip-flopped.
That's true. And of course, we're very family-centered. And so when you're risking capital, it could be damaging to the family itself. But entrepreneurs, I know serial entrepreneurs that have made and lost tens of millions of dollars. I'm working with a guy right now. In his early 30s, he made $20 million. Within a year, it was almost all gone. I mean, the company collapsed. He had 85 employees, and the company he was working with canceled the contract. He didn't see that one coming. And then he's rebuilt his company. And so serial entrepreneurs have succeeded and failed continuously. And that's the cycle. For every Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, there's thousands of guys that just didn't make it.
And that's okay. One of the statistics that's out there right now about veterans transitioning into the world of entrepreneurship is it's over 50%. It may be as high as 60% of veterans actually go into business for themselves. And veterans have a 30% higher rate of success in entrepreneurial ventures than your typical non-veteran.
That doesn't surprise me. And I think it has to do with, when you look at the military decision-making process, where you're taking, you do your mission analysis and all of that sort of thing. You'd be surprised how many businesses don't do a very good job of building a good business plan. We also, in the military, we function in teams. And part of your team in the private sector is a good accountant and a lawyer. Don't start down a path unless you understand what the business venture looks like, and how much money it's going to cost you, and the ways that you can start a business at much less cost. Building partnerships, understanding what your legal and fiduciary responsibilities are is really key. There's a great program that the Kaufman Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership teaches called Fast Track, FASTTRAC. It is, and I took this course. I'll tell you, it's awesome. I mean, if you're thinking you'd like to start a business, the Fast Track program is something that the audience needs to look into, because when you go through this, you're either going to know that you want to do the business or you're going to know you don't want to go down that path.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned the Kauffman Foundation Fast Track program. I've actually got some feelers out to get a couple of those folks that are involved in that program on the podcast to tell us all about Kauffman Fast Track, because it's a great program for everybody. But the military, I believe it's, if you apply and get accepted, you can actually go for free. Yeah, I think it's still that way unless they've changed it. But even so, even if you have to pay for it, it's still worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City is the only foundation that is set up for entrepreneurship, and their fast track program has been licensed to universities and organizations around the country.
Yeah, so you don't have to be in Kansas City necessarily to go to it. And even if you come from a different part of the country, you can go to the one at Kauffman and then go back to where you're living. So it's not restricted to Kansas City only, but that's where the foundation has its headquarters, and they've been branching out from there.
That's correct. In fact, I'm a coach and a mentor on a fast track program right now.
Oh, great.
But if your listeners are interested, they just go into Google and type in Fast Track or Kauffman Foundation, Kauffman Foundation, and they'll find Fast Track there, and then you can find out where the program is available. All
right. A few minutes ago you mentioned lawyers and accountants being on your team. That's probably something that's unfamiliar to a lot of veterans, because I know I was. Yeah, the only time I ever needed an accountant was around tax time, and the only time I ever needed a lawyer was when something had gone wrong. So it might be a shift change to actually go seek out those guys ahead of time, and have them on your side as you start to put a business together.
Well, absolutely, because, for instance, why did I form an LLC, a limited liability corporation? Because I wanted to separate my personal assets from my business assets. Now, if anything happens to my business and I get sued in the business, I want to make damn sure that they don't go after my personal assets.
Right.
So, if you're going into business, you need to understand what your legal liabilities are. And so that's why you got to talk to a lawyer. I would start by talking to a good accountant, though, because a good accountant can get you set up. And none of these are very expensive, by the way. There'll be an initial outlay of funds, but it's not as bad as you think. I mean, I do have lawyers that charge $450 an hour. And when I got them on the phone, we talk real fast.
Yeah, they charge by the minute.
Yeah. So I got to make very clear what maybe send them a question or something like this, so that I think they bill in quarter hours or something like that. But you can get a lot of useful information. And what you don't want to do is go down the road and invest a bunch of personal capital and time, effort, and energy, and then find yourself crosswise with the law or upside down financially, because it would be a very expensive proposition.
Right. So I want to go ahead and wrap this session up with you. I hope to have you on the show in the future, especially hear about how the Center for Transitional Leadership is going, maybe 6 months or a year down the road. So
sounds good.
Thanks for sharing your experiences with us. It's decades of military and civilian and entrepreneurial experience. It's a lot of life lessons learned, and hopefully everybody's listening, getting something out of it, which I'm sure they are. So I appreciate talking with you today, sir, and we'll look forward to talking with you in the near future.
Well, thanks, Joe, and thanks for the opportunity, and good luck to the audience on their transition.
All right. Well, these two veterans are Oscar Mike. Thank you for listening to Veteran on the Move, your pathfinder to freedom. If you like the show, leave us a review on iTunes. Reviews are always greatly appreciated. So until next time, this veteran is Oscar Mike.